Hi and hello to our next episode of Talk Data to Me. Have you ever thought about how data becomes something people can actually interact with? Because that's what we are talking about today. That's the new topic of our episode today, data products. I'm Toni, this is Mitja, we are both from Deconium Data. So Mitja, please tell us a few words about you.
Yes, so I'm a service designer at Deconium Data in Berlin, and I'm also part of the enabler team of the Data Product Factory, which is our corporate incubator. I'm sure we'll get to talk a bit about that later.
Yes, we will. So let's start from the very scratch. What actually is a data product?
Yeah, so on one hand, we have data, which in our case is our raw material. That's what we use to transform and extract insights from. And on the other hand, we have products, which can be software assets, basically repeatable systems or services that are also scalable and that we can create business value with. But of course, they also need to answer a real user need and a problem, solve a problem. So all in all, the data products is a reusable system that answers a user needs and creates value for the business.
Mm-hmm. So can you give us a little bit more real-world example to get it a little bit more tangible?
Yeah, so in the factory, we work on various different topics. It can go from reporting sustainability data or to forecasting toolkits, for example, which was one of the latest projects. The forecasting toolkit is a data product in terms of that it uses data, for example, revenue data of a company or inventory data to do forecastings of future revenues or inventory stock, for example. What we came to realize during our market research is that the companies do not necessarily have specialized resources to do accurate and advanced forecastings. Mm-hmm. And also the available tools on the market are either code heavy and enable advanced forecasting, or there are no code solutions, but they remain pretty shallow in the features they offer. So what we ended up doing is to use AI and machine learning to create a no-code solution that enables more advanced forecasting, also for not data experts.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And next, I want to know, you mentioned you're working in the Data Product Factory. Can you tell a few words about what actually is the Data Product Factory?
Sure. So the Data Product Factory is basically an incubator that we have at Deconium to create data products. And it always follows a similar process or a blueprint, mm-hmm. which is structured in 4 different phases. The first one is explore, then we design, we build, and then ship. So in those phases, we have different methodologies that we use. We always start with an idea owner that basically has a first idea about a data product. And we help them designing it, figuring out what problems to solve, etc. And we have a different, we have a variety of toolkits and methods that we can use and apply. And we follow that blueprint, but sometimes we also allow flexibility, of course, mm-hmm. because it all depends on the domain, the project, and also the maturity level of certain ideas.
Mm-hmm. So the mentioned idea owner is the person who has an idea for a data product buzzing around his or her head, and the person comes to you. What are your next steps, and where do you as a developer or a designer come in?
Yeah, so the first step usually is to try to figure out if we're actually addressing a real problem, mm-hmm. because we could solve the wrong problem really well, but we're still solving the wrong problem. So we step in right in the beginning to try to talk to potential users. Mm-hmm. That's really one of the first steps, and trying to figure out what are their needs, their challenges, and see if the solution has a fit. In parallel, we also lead market research and mm-hmm. do some competition analysis to see if there's a potential in the market as well.
Yeah, and speaking of users, we got the end consumer of a data product and of course of normal products too. Where do you include the potential end consumer in the process, in the very beginning, or do you just validate the product in the end? What are you doing?
I would say it's throughout the entire mm-hmm. process. So ideally, we start as early as possible to involve users. It sometimes can be a bit of a chicken and egg situation because mm-hmm. We don't necessarily have a very clear and defined image of what that user is. So what we do is that we build an assumption-based persona so that we can target and recruit potential users for user interviews that then help us extract insights, understand needs and challenges that we can address. And once we start crafting a solution, we do include users later on in the stages as well through co-creation activities, for example, or early design testing and even validation of prototypes towards the end of the development.
And be completely honest, have you ever had the situation that you developed a product, you loved it, the idea was great, the process went well, until the point everything turned out not as expected? You know, the final product was not what you needed or what you wanted.
Yeah, so we had that situation, but more early in the stages, which is the more ideal situation. So in the product factory, one outcome can also be that we recommend not to continue to pursue a certain project or opportunity. And we want to realize that as early as possible. That's why we lead the user research and market research as the first steps. And for example, we had it once that during market research, we realized that the market was very crowded and even very dynamic and changing by the day. And we recommended to not continue in that path because it will represent too much effort to enter this new market as a player.
So thanks for sharing. I want to dive in another direction because since you're a designer, I'm also interested in the creative process. What's the difference of creating a data product instead of creating a typical non-data product, you know, like a chair or a desk?
Yeah, so my background is actually in industrial and service design. And I mean, if we take the example of a chair, which is quite different from a data product, there are some core differences, but also some similarities, I would say. I think the main difference is that in the data product, the main value comes from the data, so the raw material we're actually using there. Because if the data is not of good quality or the model we use to transform the data to extract insights is not delivering correctly, then no amount of good design can correct that. We first need good data and good insights, and then the user experience design can actually help to make it more usable and better to use. On the flip side, for designing a chair, for example, the material can be wood or plastic, but it wouldn't change the core function of that chair, which is still meant to sit on. So what it does influence, though, is maybe the aesthetics, the look and feel of the product. It can influence the consumer's choice. It can create emotional connection to the product. But the usability mainly comes from the function of it. So I would say that's one of the core differences. But then they're also similar in the way that design is always starting with the user. So that process is the same. In data products, we also try to understand the user needs in the first steps and trying to include the users throughout the design process.
That's really interesting. Thanks for your insights. And one last question, a personal one. In your own opinion, what makes a successful data product?
Yeah, I would say it's a good data product basically enables the user to make informed and data-driven decisions, and that's without necessarily being a data expert. It's also making data, which is something rather complex, usable, and transforms it into a meaningful simplicity.
Okay, so thanks a lot, Mitja, for talking with me about the topic of data products. This was our second episode of Talk Data to Me. Be excited for the third one. And yeah, thanks again, and we say bye.